Urenna is gone, but the palace of Alaezi has not known peace since the gates closed behind her.
The queen believes the matter is finished. Lady Somtochukwu believes she has already won. But they forgot one thing.
The king has returned.
And unlike the others, he does not judge with emotion.
He judges with truth. And the moment he begins asking questions, everything starts to fall apart.
The Secret Love of the Prince, Part 6.
By the time night fully settled over the palace of Alaezi, the echoes of Urenna's departure had not faded. They had only changed form. What had once been open tension now moved quietly through the corridors, carried in lowered voices and cautious glances. Servants spoke in fragments. Guards remained more alert than usual. Even the nobles, who thrived on spectacle, had retreated into a watchful silence. Because something about the way it had ended did not feel like an ending. Prince Chidera had not been seen since the gates closed behind her. The queen had withdrawn to her private chambers without another word. And Lady Somtochukwu watched, waited, calculated. The palace held its breath, as though it knew that something else was coming. Something that would not arrive with whispers, but with certainty. And then it did. The sound came first. Not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable. The deep, steady rhythm of approaching footsteps along the stone corridor leading to the inner court. Measured, unhurried, deliberate. And with each step, the air itself seemed to shift, subtly, but undeniably. Those who heard it did not need to ask who it was, because there was only one presence in the kingdom that carried that kind of weight without announcement. And when the doors of the inner court opened, no one spoke. No one moved. Because the king of Alaezi had returned. He did not enter with guards. He did not require them. His presence alone commanded more attention than any display of force ever could. Tall, composed, unshaken by the weight of the crown he bore. His attire reflected neither excess nor was simplicity, but authority. A richly woven royal robe in deep indigo, threaded with subtle gold patterns, layered with coral beads that rested firmly against his chest. Every detail was intentional. Every detail restrained. His face revealed little. Not anger. Not curiosity. Only control. The kind that did not need to be proven. His gaze moved slowly across the chamber, taking in everything without appearing to search for anything. The silence deepened under that gaze. Because unlike the queen, who ruled through command, the king ruled through presence. And presence like his did not rush to judgment. It arrived. It observed. And then it decided.
Where is my son?
The question was calm, even, but it carried through the chamber with a weight that pressed against every person present. No one answered immediately, not because they did not know, but because they understood that whatever answer was given would not remain a simple answer for long. The queen entered moments later, not hurried, not unsettled, but aware. Her gaze met his without hesitation, her posture as composed as it had been in the hall earlier that day. Yet something unspoken passed between them in that single glance. Something that did not belong to the court, but to the quiet space where power was not performed, but shared. "You have returned sooner than expected," she said. The king regarded her briefly. "I was informed," he replied. Nothing more. But it was enough. Because those 3 words carried implication. Not of ignorance, but of awareness. Of events that had already reached beyond the walls of the palace. The queen held his gaze. "And what you were told," she said carefully, "does not require further disruption. The matter has been resolved." A pause. Small. Controlled. Then, has it? The question was quiet, but it did not feel like one. It felt like the beginning of something. Something that would not be settled with decisions already made. Something that would look beyond actions and into consequences. And for the first time since the matter began, the control within the palace did not feel singular. It felt divided. The question lingered in the air long after it was spoken. Has it? It did not echo, yet it remained, settling into the silence with a quiet insistence that refused to be ignored. The queen did not respond immediately. For the first time since the matter began, her composure, though still intact, seemed to shift ever so slightly beneath the weight of his presence. Not weaken, not falter, but adjust. Because this was not the court. This was not a hall filled with watching eyes and careful performances. This was something else. And the rules here were different.
"The girl has been sent away. The situation has been contained."
The king regarded her without interruption, his expression unchanged. "Contained," he repeated quietly. The words seemed to settle between them, turning over in the space like something being examined. "And you believe that is the end of it?" The queen's gaze sharpened slightly. "It is the appropriate course," she replied, "before it became something more difficult to control." A pause followed. Then, "It already has." The words were not raised, not emphasized, but they carried a weight that made the silence deepen once more. The queen held his gaze, unyielding. "This was not a matter that required your intervention," she said. "And yet," he replied calmly, "it has reached me." That alone shifted something. Because it meant the situation had moved beyond private concern, beyond palace walls, beyond control. The queen straightened slightly. "And what is it you intend to do?" she asked. For a brief moment, the king said nothing. His gaze moved, not away, but past her, toward something unseen, something already unfolding. Then, quietly, "I intend to understand why my son would stand against his own throne." And just like that, the matter was no longer closed. Prince Chidera stood alone in the far wing of the palace, where the noise of the court could not reach him. The room he occupied was vast, but sparsely adorned, more a place of retreat than display. A single window stood open, allowing the cool night air to pass through, carrying with it the distant sounds of the world beyond the palace walls. Beyond those walls, she was already gone. The thought settled heavily within him, refusing to be pushed aside. He had stood before his mother without hesitation, spoken without restraint, declared without fear. And yet, it had not been enough. His hands rested against the edge of the stone ledge before him, fingers tightening slightly as the memory of the moment replayed in his mind. Her voice, her decision, her leaving. Not forced, not broken, chosen. That was what made it harder to accept. Because she had not been taken from him. She had stepped away. And in doing so, she had left him standing within a world that suddenly felt more rigid than it ever had before. You let her go. The voice came from behind him. Calm, familiar, unavoidable. Chidera did not turn immediately, because he already knew. There was only one voice in the kingdom that carried that kind of stillness without effort. After a brief moment, he exhaled slowly and faced him. The king stood near the entrance, unmoving, his presence filling the room without demand. I did not stop her, Chidera replied. The king studied him carefully. That is not the same thing. Chidera held his gaze. No, he said, it is not. And in that exchange, there was no anger, no raised voices.
Only something far more difficult to face. Understanding. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with everything that had not yet been said. The king stepped further into the room, his movements unhurried, his attention fixed entirely on his son. You stood before the court, he said, before your mother, before those who watch this throne with expectation. Chidera did not look away. Yes. And you chose to speak against them. I chose to speak the truth. A brief pause. The king regarded him closely. And what is truth, he asked quietly, when it stands in opposition to the structure that holds a kingdom together? The question did not come as a challenge. It came as something else. A measure. Chidera's expression did not shift. Then perhaps that structure is flawed. The words hung between them. Heavy. Uncompromising. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the king exhaled softly, not in frustration, not in approval, but in acknowledgement of what had just been said. You speak as one who has not yet felt the full weight of consequence, he said. And you speak as one who has accepted it without question, Chidera replied. That was the line. Clear, defined, unavoidable. The king's gaze sharpened slightly, not with anger, but with focus. Then you will learn. The words were calm, but they carried something deeper, final. Not as punishment, but as certainty. Chidera's jaw tightened. I am not afraid of that. No, the king said. I do not believe you are. A pause. Then, which is why this will cost you more than you expect. The air shifted. Because this was no longer a conversation. It was the beginning of something else. Something neither of them could step away from. And for the first time, the path ahead did not feel uncertain. It felt inevitable. The air between them settled into something firm. Not tense, not chaotic, but defined. The kind of stillness that comes when words have crossed into meaning, and meaning can no longer be undone. The king took another step forward, closing the distance just enough to make his presence unavoidable. Not imposing, but absolute. You believe this is about love, he said. Chidera did not hesitate. It is. The answer came without doubt, without softness, without retreat. The king studied him for a long moment, as though measuring not just the words, but the certainty behind them. And you believe that is enough? Chidera's expression hardened slightly. I believe it should be. A faint shift crossed the king's face. Not disagreement, not agreement, but recognition. You speak of what should be, he said quietly. I speak of what is. The distinction settled heavily between them, because it was not philosophical. It was real. You were not born into a life where desire defines outcome, the king continued. You were born into responsibility. And responsibility requires sacrifice, Chidera replied. Yes, the king said. A pause. Then, but it does not ask whether you are willing to give it. The weight of that truth pressed forward, leaving no room for easy answers. Chidera held his ground. I am willing. The king's gaze sharpened, just slightly. Then you will prove it. The words did not rise. They did not strike. But they landed with quiet finality. Because this was no longer discussion. This was declaration. And in that moment, the nature of the conflict changed, from resistance to trial.
Chidera did not move, but something within him shifted. Not uncertainty, not fear, but awareness. Because whatever came next would not be simple. What does that mean? He asked. The question was steady, but it carried something beneath it. Preparation. The king did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned slightly, his gaze drifting toward the open window, the same direction Chidera had been looking moments before. Beyond the palace walls, beyond control, beyond reach. For generations, the king began, this throne has not been sustained by desire, but by decision. His voice remained calm, measured, but each word carried weight. Men before you have believed they could shape their path differently, that they could hold both the crown and something outside of it. A brief pause. They were wrong. The finality of that statement did not invite argument. It ended it. Chidera's jaw tightened slightly. I am not them. No, the king agreed. You are not. And yet, there was something in the way he said it that suggested difference did not mean exemption. It is easy to speak of love when it has not yet been tested, the king continued. When it exists without consequence, without pressure, without cost. Now he turned back, facing him fully. But what you claim, a pause, deliberate, will not survive unless it can endure more than feeling. The words settled deeply, because they did not dismiss what Chidera felt. They challenged it. What are you asking of me? Chidera said. The king's gaze held his. I am not asking. Another pause. Then, I am giving you a condition. And just like that, the line had been drawn. The room seemed to grow quieter, as though even the air understood that what came next would define everything that followed. Chidera's focus did not waver. Say it. The king regarded him for a moment longer, ensuring that what was about to be said would not be misunderstood. Then, if what you feel is as strong as you claim. He paused, not for effect, but for weight.
then you will walk away from this palace. The words landed slowly, deliberately. And for the first time, Chidera's expression shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. You will leave behind your position, the king continued. Your title, your protection, your authority. Each word stripped something away, piece by piece. You will go into the world beyond these walls, not as a prince, but as a man. The silence deepened, because now the meaning was clear, not symbolic, not temporary, real. You will live without the name that shields you, the king said, without the power that defines you. Chidera did not speak. He did not interrupt, because he understood. You will find her, the king finished, and you will build something that does not depend on what you were born into. A pause. Then, and if you cannot. The final words came without harshness, without threat, but with absolute certainty. Then you will return. The air seemed to still completely, and you will accept the life that has been chosen for you. No anger, no force, only inevitability. Because this was not punishment, it was truth.
And in that moment, the cost of love was no longer abstract. It had a shape, a path, a consequence, and it demanded everything. The words did not leave him immediately, not because he did not have an answer, but because he understood, with sudden and undeniable clarity, that whatever he said next would not remain within the safety of this room. It would define him, not as a prince, but as something else entirely. Chidera turned slowly, his gaze drifting toward the open window once more. Beyond it, the world stretched wide and uncontained. Distant lands untouched by the weight of the palace, by expectation, by legacy. Somewhere within that distance was her, already beyond his reach, already walking a path that had been decided far too quickly. The thought settled heavily within him, but it did not weaken him. If anything, it clarified everything. You are asking me to abandon everything I have been raised to become, he said at last. The king did not respond, because he did not need to. The truth of it stood on its own. Chidera exhaled slowly, his hands resting briefly at his sides, before tightening slightly. All my life, he continued, I have been told what this crown requires, what it demands, what it takes. A pause. Then, but no one ever asked what it costs. The words hung in the air. Not bitter, not defiant, but real. He turned back fully now, meeting his father's gaze without hesitation. And now that I understand it, another pause. Quieter, more personal. I am not sure I can accept it. The admission did not come easily, but once spoken, it did not waver. The king regarded him in silence, not surprised, not unsettled, but attentive, as though he had expected this moment long before it arrived. You believe this is a choice between two paths,
he said after a while. Chidera did not respond, because that was exactly what it felt like. The king took another step forward. It is not. The simplicity of the statement caused something in Chidera's expression to shift. Then what is it? He asked. The king's gaze remained steady. It is a question of who you are when everything that defines you is removed. The words settled deeply because they stripped away illusion, expectation, even identity. You have been a prince since the day you were born, the king continued. Every decision, every movement, every thought shaped by that reality. A pause. But if that is taken from you, what remains? The question did not come with judgment. It came with weight. Chidera did not answer immediately, because for the first time, he did not have one. Not a complete one. Not something he could say with certainty. And that silence said more than words could. The king nodded slightly, as though acknowledging that realization. This is not about proving your love to me, he said. It is about proving it to yourself. The room seemed to close in around the meaning of that. Not physically, but in a way that made everything else feel distant, unimportant, reduced. Because in that moment, there was only one thing that mattered. Choice. Real. Unavoidable.
Chidera's gaze dropped briefly, not in doubt, but in thought. Deep, measured, and unhurried. He could see it now. The life that had been laid before him. Structured, certain, defined by duty and expectation. And then, the path his father had placed before him. Uncertain, unprotected, stripped of everything he had ever known, but leading to her, to something real, something unchosen by others, something that belonged to him alone. His hands tightened slightly at his sides. Then, slowly, he lifted his head. When he spoke, his voice was calm. But there was something new beneath it. Something solid.
I will go.
The words landed without force, without emphasis. But they carried everything. Because there was no hesitation. No condition. No request for time. Only decision. The king watched him carefully. Not approving. Not disapproving. Simply observing. Because this was the moment. And moments like this did not need reaction. They needed recognition. Chidera held his gaze. I will leave the palace, he continued. I will find her. And I will build something that does not depend on this throne. The silence that followed was not empty. It was final. Because the choice had been made. And nothing after this would be the same again. The silence that followed Chidera's decision did not linger. It shifted.
Sharpened. Spread. Because within the palace of Alaezi, Decisions of that magnitude did not remain contained within a single room. They moved, quietly at first, carried through corridors and across guarded thresholds, slipping into the awareness of those who understood what such a choice meant. By the time the Queen was informed, it had already begun to settle. Not as rumor, but as reality. She stood in her private chamber, unmoving as the words were delivered. The servant who brought the message did not dare look directly at her, his head bowed deeply, his voice careful and precise as he repeated what had been said. The prince would leave. Not temporarily, not in protest, but in decision. For a brief moment, nothing happened. No visible reaction. No immediate command. Only stillness. And yet, within that stillness, something shifted. Not outwardly, but inwardly. Because while the court might see defiance, the Queen saw something else. Loss of control. Not over her son, but over the order she had spent years preserving. "You are certain?" she asked at last. The servant swallowed lightly. "Yes, Your Majesty." Another silence followed. Longer this time. Heavier. Then, "You may go." The dismissal was calm, measured, but it carried something beneath it that made the servant leave more quickly than he intended. The moment the door closed, the silence changed. Her posture remained perfect, her expression composed, but her gaze hardened. Because this was no longer about a girl, no longer about a passing disruption. This had become something far more dangerous. A fracture. And fractures, if left unattended, did not remain contained.
When the Queen entered the inner council chamber, she did not announce herself. She did not need to. The shift in the room was immediate. Nobles who had been speaking in hushed tones fell silent. Advisors straightened where they stood. Even those who had not yet heard the full extent of what had occurred seemed to sense that something irreversible had taken place. Because the Queen did not move like someone responding to a minor disturbance. She moved like someone preparing to correct it. Her attire reflected her position fully. A structured royal gown of deep burgundy layered with gold embroidery, coral beads resting firmly against her neck and wrists, her headpiece perfectly set, not a single detail out of place. Every step she took was deliberate, every movement controlled. She reached the center of the chamber and stopped. No greeting, no acknowledgement, only presence. "Close the doors," she said. The command was immediate, final. The heavy wooden doors shut with a quiet, echoing weight that seemed to seal the room from the rest of the palace. Her gaze moved across those gathered, one by one, measuring, assessing. And in that moment, it became clear. This was no longer private. "The Crown Prince has made a decision," she said. No emotion, no hesitation. But the effect was immediate. Tension tightened, breaths stilled, eyes shifted. Because though the words were simple, the meaning behind them was not. "He intends to leave the palace." The silence that followed was absolute. Not shocked, not confused, but stunned. Because within the structure of the kingdom, that was not a choice that simply existed. It was a rupture. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Because there were no easy responses to what had just been said. Not within a system built on certainty. Not within a court that thrived on control. Finally, one of the elder advisors stepped forward slightly, his voice cautious, but unable to remain silent. "Your Majesty, this cannot be allowed." The Queen's gaze shifted to him. Calm. Unmoved. "Allowed?" She repeated. The word was not loud, but it carried enough weight to make the advisor falter. "This is not a matter of permission," she continued. "It is a matter of consequence." The distinction settled heavily, because it changed everything. Another voice rose, more uncertain this time. "If the prince leaves, what does that mean for succession?" There it was, the question no one wished to ask, but all needed answered. The Queen did not respond immediately, because the answer was not simple, and that alone made it dangerous. "It means," she said at last, "that the stability of this throne will be tested."
No dramatics, no exaggeration, only truth. "And what of the king?" another asked carefully. The room shifted again, because that question carried its own weight. The Queen's expression did not change, but something behind it did. "The king is aware," she said. And that was all. But it was enough. Because if he knew, then what came next would not be contained to this chamber. The Queen straightened slightly, her presence settling once more into something firm and immovable. "This is not the moment for uncertainty," she said. "It is the moment for control." Her gaze hardened. "Prepare yourselves." A pause. Then, because what follows will determine whether this kingdom stands or fractures. And in that moment, the conflict was no longer personal. It had become something far greater. A battle not just for love, but for the future of the throne itself. The palace of Alaezi had been shaken, not by war, not by betrayal, but by a choice. A prince had chosen love over legacy, over power, over the crown itself. And now, the cost of that choice was no longer hidden. It had begun. Because beyond the palace walls, a path had already been set in motion. One that would test not just love, but identity, sacrifice, and survival. And the question was no longer whether they would fight for each other, but whether they could survive what was coming. If you think Chidera will truly walk away from the throne for Urenna, comment love over power below. And if you believe the throne will pull him back, comment the crown always wins. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because in the next part, the real journey begins. And this time, love will not be protected. It will be tested.